have with us a very popular author of globally best-selling thrillers and the creator and executive producer of some of your favorite web shows on Netflix: Safe, Stay Close, The Stranger, The Innocent, and The Woods, apart from other TV shows airing in France and Germany. His thrillers are published in 45 languages and have been #1 bestsellers in more than a dozen countries. In short, this man here is every author's dream come true. Yes, it can happen. It happened to Harlan. Welcome, Harlan Coben. So
Nice to
happy
be.
to have you here.
Thank you. So nice to be here. Thanks.
Harlan, now with 33 novels to your name and 75 million books still in print, I believe that since the year 2010, you have been writing one book a year. And on top of it, now you're also participating in the production of your book to film adaptations. And that I'm sure takes up a lot of your time. So can I ask you to share a secret here? How many hours in a day did God give you?
No, it's just when you write, it's easy to waste time. And so with the addition of TV production and writing the books, I've had to learn how to budget the time better. But the one thing that's interesting is that they feed off each other. So as a novelist, most novelists, and I am one, are introverts at heart. I've spent most of my life alone in a room. TV, of course, is the opposite. It's very collaborative. You're talking to a lot of people. So they feed off each other. When I go on, if I'm alone in the room for a long time, I'm happy to go on set and talk to actors and other writers and the cast and crew. But once I'm on set for 3 or 4 days, I start to lose my mind because I'm an introvert. And all I want to do is lock myself back in the room and write the novel. So they are, rather than taking away from one another, they almost feed off each other.
Yeah. And do you feel that in the near future, at any point, getting into the production of so many of these web shows and all, would interfere with the writing of your books? Could that happen? And would you allow it to happen?
So far, it hasn't. If it does, I'll slow down one or the other. I mean, the TV shows, the TV series are really my side job. My main job is still to write the novel. So that always still takes priority for me. So far, I'm able to fit it in, but maybe 1 year, I won't have the book out, or the show will be delayed or whatever else. But so far, I've been able to do both. I just find that, I think people can find more time than they think. I never really believe, and I'm sorry if I'm getting somebody out there angry, when you say to me, oh, I want to write a book, but I don't have the time. I don't really believe you. You have the time. You just have other priorities in your life that's more important than your time. You could wake up an hour earlier. You could sit at a desk and write during your lunch hour. You could skip that TV show. You don't have to look at your social media, whatever it is, you can always find more time. So I never really believed that argument. So far it's worked out, but there may come a time when I say to my publisher, you know what, no book this year, or the TV people, that particular show, let's delay it a year. But so far, not yet.
I hope not, because that one book lesser may mean a show lesser as well, because your show is based on the books as well. So when talking about web shows, do you get the time to watch your own once they are done?
Oh, well, I watched it, but before the show goes on Netflix or wherever you're watching it, I've watched it 1,000 times. I mean, I watched it, all the different edits. I've watched all the different drafts. I've made comments. I can barely watch it because I've seen it so often.
Yeah, but that's not as much fun as not knowing what's coming next.
Right. And I can say the words with the characters by the time I see it, but usually there's that one moment, one of my kids hasn't seen it yet, and I will sit and watch the show with him or her, and that's just a fun experience.
But now you're seeing it through their eyes.
There's still things I want to change. There's still things I'm not exactly thrilled with. That's just part of the business, though.
Yeah. And do you get the time to read? Do you read books, not your own, but other books?
Of course. Yeah. I don't know any writer who doesn't, it's like, I don't know any musician who doesn't listen to a lot of music. I don't know any writer who doesn't read a lot. So I still read a lot. As I get older, I fall asleep more when I read, and I read a little slower. The caveat to that is, though, as a writer, a lot of what makes me produce pages is guilt and
Hmm.
anger and self-hatred, if you will. So when I'm reading, there's always a little voice in my head that says, you should be writing.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm doing anything,
Yes,
even doing these interviews, or I get a call, or I go, oh, you have to schedule interviews. I'm like, it's time I should be writing. So that guilt is always in my head. Whatever I'm doing, we're taking a walk, if I'm playing golf, if I'm taking a drive in the car, there's always a small voice in my head that says, I don't know any writer who doesn't. We all the imposter syndrome. Only bad writers think they're good.
yeah.
That doesn't go away. This is my 35th book coming out now, including the children's book. So still have those doubts still come in. And I know a lot of writers have written more than I have, and they feel the same. I think when that goes away, when you have too much, when you have a little bit of overconfidence or start thinking all the time that your stuff is great, um, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's a weird business because you have all these doubts and you think, oh, I'm terrible, I stink, no one will want to read it. At the same time, you have the hubris to think, oh, I'm going to write 400 or 500 pages and you're going to pay me to read it.
Yeah.
So both things seem to contradict each other, but they both exist in the same world.
But that's beautiful. It's so wonderful to hear you say that sometimes when you're writing, you feel that your writing is not good enough. And then you go back to it and you make it better. And that kind of self-doubt, I feel, really pushes us to perfection, to get better and better. Otherwise, one doesn't get any better, really. So how did you
Yes.
get into writing, Harlan?
I'm sorry?
How did you start writing? Did you always want to be a writer?
I, you know, No, whenever I'm on a panel and they ask that question, there's always the writers are always like, "Oh yes, I always knew. When I was a 4-month-old fetus, I was writing sonatas in my mother's womb, and all this sort of manage." And when I was 6 years old, the children gathered around me in the playground when I told them story. I'm like, that doesn't really happen. And in my neighborhood, you got beaten up for that, and I didn't grow up in a tough neighborhood. I came to it later. I've always loved story. As a writer, as a kid, I probably had a little too much imagination. My essays would always take on a fictional flair, if you will. Even if it was sort of a serious paper, I would have dialogue in it. When I was in college, I had sort of an idea for something that I wanted to write as a novel, even though I'd taken no writing classes in my college. And I did. I just sat in a room in my senior year of college and I wrote out an entire novel. It was a terrible novel. It was awful, pretentious, pompous, self-absorbed, the way first novels should be. But from there, I sort of learned and developed my own craft on my own, not with classes, just by reading and seeing what other people were doing and developing your own voice. Writing is one of the few activities where quantity will inevitably make quality. And so the more you write, the better you get at it, at least from the beginning.
And what about ideas? I mean, to churn out novel after novel and to, it's not as if it's just one idea of the plot. It's that you have so many twists and turns in your novels and your thrillers that uh, I just wonder how you come upon those ideas and how are you thinking all the time? Are you picking up ideas from real life, from the world of crime? How do you get these ideas?
You know, I think that like most things, writing is about, there's nature and nurture, right? How much of it is what you're taught and how much is your natural ability. I see the world in terms of twists and turns. That's my nature. When I'm watching shows, when I read books, when I walk down the streets, I'm constantly in my mind naturally is asking, well, what if? So if I'm watching a TV show, not only will I normally guess the ending, which is not normally so hard, but I probably can come up with 4 or 5 alternatives that they could have gone. Well, they could have done this, they could have done that. And even in real life, whenever I look at anything, I do that same thing. When I write a novel, there's 4 or 5 topics that I normally want to hit, and then I start asking the what if. I'll give a quick example on The Match, which is a sequel to The Boy from the Woods. So I was hiking in the woods with my family, and I hate hiking. I find hiking boring. It's a tree and then another tree and there's grass. I get it. I prefer walking in the streets of New York. I can see storefronts. I can go into bookstores. I can see faces. I can look at cafes. That's interesting to me. The woods, not interesting to me. But I'm walking with my family, I'm hiking, and I'm kind of bored. Parallel to me, a 6-year-old boy walking by himself. So my mind is working the what if. Well, what if this boy just came out of the woods right now? And in the woods, I have no idea who my parents are. I broke into cabins to feed myself. I lived off the land. I have no idea how I got here or where I was. I'm like, wow, that's kind of interesting. Now 30 years pass and he still doesn't know. He still doesn't know. And in the match, he finds out what happened. So that's how there's an example of what I mean. My mind is constantly sort of asking, what if, in big ways and in small ways.
How interesting to know how that started off, because I've just finished reading The Match, and to know how it started with just a hike in the woods, and there the idea comes up, and you write not one but two books already you've written on that boy.
Well, I make it sound like this took 5 minutes. This was hours and
Sure.
hours. And I write down, I have thousands of what ifs in my head, and only one gets to rise to the top. You know, only one, or well, more than one. And then also, in the case of the match, I wanted to explore with my daughters. I had watched some of these reality shows like Bachelor and all of that with them. They're not for me, but so, and then Instagram influencers. I wanted to do trolling that you see online. I was fascinated by these DNA genealogy websites that are changing our lives, where you find out maybe your parents aren't your parents, or you find out you came from a different background. So all of these things, and then I write them all down or think about them all, and then I'm like, well, how many can I put into this novel? And in the case of the match, all of them,
Yeah.
all of those things that I just mentioned are in this
They
story.
are, yes, they are there. In fact, that was my next question. I was coming to this, that who does your research for you? Do you do it yourself? Because particularly this book, The Match, it has all that you just mentioned, the reality show. It has so much of the internet, what we find on the web. And for instance, Wilde's eco capsule, his micro home where he stays, such a fascinating little place, which is which incorporates both solar and wind power, and yeah, it's amazing. I mean, how do you do all this? How do you get into all this research?
I'll be honest with you, I'm a lazy researcher, and I recommend that to most of the writers out there. I think too many writers do too much research. I'm probably the only writer you'll hear say that recommend to writers to do less research, but here's why. Researching is more fun than writing. It's easier. So you'll sit there and they'll say, oh, I'm going to write this scene on Fifth Avenue in New York, but first I have to fly to Fifth Avenue and have to. No, you've been there, or you know it, or you can imagine it. Write it now and then worry about the research later. Don't let the research stop the writing. And the second thing is, people who do a lot of research have a tendency to slow down the story. You've seen a lot of books where they fall in love with the research, they're boring you with too many factoids. Not a problem with me, I don't know that much. There's a lot of seeming research in the match, but almost all of it is everyday research. If someone's going on a date out there, they're going to Google the guy's name. That's just the world. If you don't, that's unrealistic. So all of these things are what's scary. What makes it more scary is that this is not deep research. This is just normal stuff. Anybody can get a DNA test. Everyone knows that now. That's not a surprise. Everyone knows sort of what Instagram influencers are. Everyone's watched these reality shows and seen how these people become stars and then get quickly canceled for no reason, or reasons that seem specious to us. So all of these things are out there in the regular world and don't require me to go deep diving too much.
Yeah, okay. And that is what makes the books also very much more readable, because you're not deep diving into any one aspect or any one subject, and taking the attention away from the story. Your stories move fast. So it's like, what happened next? What happened next? It's like when I'm reading your books or watching one of your shows, it's like you're dwelling in that world. And every time you're pulled out of that world for your meal or for your work or for something else, you're eager to get back into it. It's like you have to go somewhere. So you pick up the book and again you're lost in that world. So that is amazing. That kind of a quick movement and that fascination and being totally involved in that. So
Well,
I
thank you. That's my goal. I mean, my goal is that you get lost in it. My goal is that you go on vacation someplace, but you'd rather stay in your hotel room because you have to know what happened.
yeah.
And that when you're out of those worlds, you're missing it. I love when that happens to me, and the fact that I can give that to somebody else where they're thinking, oh, I'll read 10 minutes before I go to bed, and you're up till 4 in the morning. that's a wonderful feeling, and that's always my goal. So thank you.
Happens to me all the time, all the
Thank
time.
you.
Yeah, so I'm like, awake all through the night. One thing I have to ask you, with, being so involved and so immersed in the criminal world, thinking crime, resolving, solving crime, and having to think about the different uh, types of crime, kidnappings, murders, and how to's and all. Um, what kind of an impact does that have on your personal life?
I think it's almost the opposite. I think it's almost works like therapy, where in I don't really have much of it in real life, much of that sort of anxiety. I don't worry about that sort of thing. I think I'll pass it on to you, but I don't really have those sort of concerns. There's a quote from Flaubert where he said to be regular, normal, or bourgeois in your real life, so you can be violent and original in your work. And I think that's probably me. I'm a fairly boring guy. I have four kids. I've been married with the same woman for almost 40 years now. Um, so there's nothing dramatic or violent or any of that sort of stuff in my real life. And that placid pool, you can drop a pebble and it will make ripples. So I think that it's almost the opposite, where in order to pursue those sort of things, it almost helps to not be that way in real life.
Yeah, but that's the worrisome part, because most of your characters, the ones who commit murders and kidnap and all, they seem to be totally normal guys. And
Well, that's
then,
part of what I want to do too. I don't like black and white. I don't write serial killer books for the most part. I don't write, I mean, if you watched Stay Close, there was the two Ken and Barbie characters who were crazy, and
yes,
that's
oh wow, I loved them.
fun than anything else. But the heart of the crime, and the both the victims and usually the perpetrators, I want to give them real reasons. I don't want them to be villains for no reason at all. So you have to, at the end of most of the books, I want you to sort of say, well, I can almost see myself doing what the villain here did. I get why he or she did that, and
Mm.
so that's what I want. I don't really want the black and white.
And most of the time, it's like a childhood trauma or something, and which comes up in your.
Could be anything. I mean, I've written 35 books. I've had every motive you
Yeah.
can imagine.
Yeah. So have the cops ever approached you for help with their cases?
Never.
Yeah, really. Would you like to do that?
If I could help, I'd love to, but I don't think I can help. Again, the world of fiction is
Just
very limited.
imagine real life crime, and you go there, and they require a Harlan Coben to come and um, solve their crimes for them. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I don't
interesting.
think that's going to happen, but I'm here if they want to call.
You never know. You never knew that you're going to be participating in the book to screen adaptations of your books. You didn't know that some years ago.
True.
Anyway, yeah. So
Man plans, God laughs. Man
yes,
plans,
yeah,
God laughs.
that is also part of the match. Those
Yeah.
lines, in fact, yeah. So you philosophize a lot in your books and your shows as well, and you love doing that. You love rising above and giving a comment on what is happening, and you quote someone, or you, like, say, like at the end of the Innocent, there is a very beautiful line at the end of that, where you say that you never knew that you could get a second chance, and that second chance could come to you because of something you said about a woman, how you shattered the soul of a woman, and that woman has forgiven you. And that's so I like those bits in your book and your shows where you rise above and philosophize. Do you stick to like the same philosophy of life for all your books? Is that your philosophy, what you believe in?
Sometimes, I mean, I actually try to give different philosophies even to the characters who I don't necessarily agree with. I have to defend them and make sure that their point of view
Mhm.
is as strong as mine. Um, it's writing fast-paced plots is one thing, but if you have just dessert, it's not going to be good. Or I may have the greatest sports car in the world, but if there's no fuel in it, it's not going to go anyplace. So there has to be more. A lot of times you may not even notice it. You're just kind of racing the pages. But I think what makes the books do well, I hope, is not just the fact that you're panting and you're trying to find the answers. But if you don't care about these characters, it doesn't work. Like I said, you got the greatest car in the world. If it doesn't have fuel or petrol, it's not going anyplace. So that's what I think the philosophizing, the theorizing, the lifestyles, the love, if without that, it's one thing to stir the pulse. It's
Mm.
one thing to stir the brain. You have to also stir the heart, and I think those sections do that.
Mm.
They stir the brain and the heart versus just the pulse.
Is that the secret to the popularity of your thrillers?
It may be. It's not something people often point out. I think it's put. The other thing is that nothing should get in the way of the story. So I don't mind moralizing or teaching or giving philosophy, but everything has to be slave to the story. The problem is when authors think, "Oh, I have this great moment. I'm going to, tell you my opinion on things," and stop the story to do that. It has to be seamless, where most of the time you don't even notice it until later on.
Yes.
You know, you
No,
know. So
I meant what you said about stirring the pulse, stirring the heart, and stirring the brain. That's what I meant. Like, is that the secret formula that you use in your books?
it's hard for me to figure out why the books work or don't work. Um, but I do think it is that combination. I think that there's people who can maybe do the thrills as well or do one or the other as well. But I think it's the combination. I hope anyway, and I might be wrong. I hope it's the combination that makes people come back.
Yeah. Do you feel like trying out some other genre?
I don't. I don't really look at what I do as a genre. I know people do. I look at it more like a form. It's sort of like saying a haiku or a sonata. Within those forms, you can do anything you want to do, and I have. I mean, um, I've done stories of family, redemption, love, friendship, everything you can think of. What I love about the form is that it makes me still tell a story. And
Mm.
sometimes those stories are murder stories, sometimes they're kidnapping stories, sometimes they're just simple disappearances.
Mhm.
Tell No One in 6 years are more love stories than they are thrillers or whatever else. Some are more family oriented, like The Stranger or Stay Close. Some are more about, a single man on the road to redemption. You mentioned The Innocent.
Mhm.
Some are trying to solve problems from their past. You mentioned The Woods. I'm
Mhm.
using TV series as well, so we could. So they all fit under this very broad term that we call crime or suspense, but they're really. I don't really think that to me they're just novels that happen to have that sort of thing. Not and this is not a comparison, but almost all of your favorite novels that have survived 100 years have crime in them. Most of Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Wilde, Dumas, go. They all had crime. They all to a sense had crime stories because that makes it compelling to read and also really puts the characters through tests that make it interesting. It's only sort of in this modern day where we sort of equate the fact that a book has a crime in it with not being um, literary
Romantic or
different
family
than,
drama or
than what
something.
people.
Ah,
So
we
I've never looked at it as a genre. I've always looked at it as a form, and that form I can't see stopping because I always want to make the book page turning, and I would kill me if I wrote something that was boring.
Yeah. Right, it's just that I think today we try to pigeonhole books and everything, almost everything, and you
Yes.
just put it in a box and you shut it and you're happy that okay, I know what it is. But you're right, you have every kind of a story in your books and your shows, really. And what I may ask you is the process of writing, the way you write. I've read somewhere that you once said that you wrote a complete book in Uber. Is that right? And
No, not a complete one, but I did.
you said
I
you
went.
took several
I went
rides and then you've completed a book or finished the book.
I
What was it?
completed one in an Uber. Yes, I most of the writers that you'll talk to have a specific office and a pretty set schedule, and I kind of wish I did. I don't. My method is to not have a method and to keep changing it up. So, for example, before COVID, especially, I worked almost always out of the house. Part of that was having 4 children, so I had to get out of the house, otherwise, you wouldn't work. So I would go to, say, a coffee shop, and I would work well there, and I would stay there working well, maybe for 2 or 3, however long it would work until it stopped working. Then I would find something else. I would write mornings, I would write evenings, I would write on airplanes. I always write well on airplanes for some reason, so I would take more flights. So one day, this is a number of years ago when they were first coming out, I took an Uber from New Jersey to New York, and I felt kind of guilty about spending the money on an Uber. So I started to write in the back of one, and I wrote really, really well. So for 3 weeks, I took Ubers wherever I went, and I finished The Stranger in the back of an Uber. So the key piece of writing advice I would give people is, if it helps you produce pages, good. If it doesn't help you produce pages, bad. So whatever that is, if it means
Yes.
standing on your head or staying up till 3 in the morning to write pages, that's good. If it means, doing it in the afternoon or staying in your bed to do it, good. Whatever produces pages is what I do. And in my case, that changes. So I keep doing whatever's going to work.
So you actually needed to go to those places. You didn't take the Uber just to write. You actually needed to
Well,
go somewhere, so you took.
then I started to take Ubers like I would anywhere I went. So I would take Ubers places I would normally just drive,
Okay. All right. That's
because I
still
could
all
use that
right.
time.
I'm glad you
Use
clarified
that
that
time
for me.
actually right. Other times I like to do when I'm driving. I don't like to drive, but it's other times when I drive, my mind will be working through the story. So I'm always sort of in some way or another working. I'm not the best company. I'm not. My friends are kind of used to, like, all of a sudden I'll just sort of like look like this and not be listening to them, and they know I'm just sort of going off in my own little space, and that's
Yeah.
kind of rude, but that's just how I'm built.
Yeah. It would be interesting to hear from your wife what she has to say about this. Yeah. Do you remember your characters, all the characters you ever created?
No,
No.
no.
So if I
35 books. Each book
yeah.
probably has 40, at least 40 characters in them, sometimes more.
No, but the main
There's times
characters.
I'll see a page from one of my books and I won't even remember what book it is. The other thing is, I have to sort of flush it away when I finish a book so I can get to the next one. So the answer is no. In fact, it's sort of interesting when I'm doing these new TV shows. Some of the books are 20 years old now. I have to be updated. I have to
You
change them
have
and
to read
move
your
them
own
to
book.
different locations. And when I'm reading the book, I know the endings,
Yeah.
but sometimes I'm like, where am I going with this? Who is this character? I don't even remember where I'm going. It's usually a pretty good sign. But I'm actually surprised as I start to do the adaptations, when I start to read it, how much I sometimes forget and go, oh, I wonder how and then I'm even wondering, how did I come up?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? That's really weird. How did so even I do, but no, I don't. That doesn't mean I don't love them. It doesn't mean I don't value it. It doesn't mean I don't take my work seriously. But again, 35 novels over the course of 25, 26 years, whatever it is, more than that now, almost 30 years. So I don't work at trying to keep those all in my head.
Yeah.
So if I repeat something, be kind, people. It's not that I'm copying myself. My mind just is going in that direction again.
So how many incidents from your personal life do you actually, or how much of yourself do you recreate in these books and the characters?
Well, a lot in terms of the characters, not a lot in terms of the plots. As I mentioned, my regular life is pretty boring. Um, but especially, certainly with grief, I lost my parents at a fairly young age. That comes into play when I'm doing grief scenes. I hope the family stuff, the family dynamics come across pretty clearly. And my 4 kids are now grown. My youngest is almost 21. So my oldest is 27, almost 28. So, but when I was first writing the books, when I had my first New York Times bestseller, they were 7, 4, 2, and newborn. So I hope those family dimensions come out. A lot of those things come from those personal experiences and things like that. That's natural. And what stories you tell me as a friend that I will use and twist and turn. So a lot of the things are true in that way. The
Mhm.
bigger crimes, no. Um, People forget that most of writing is using your imagination. That's the other thing why against research is that you're supposed to make stuff up.
Yeah.
That's what you do.
Yeah. Yes. You had very modest beginnings. very modest origins, and you grew up to now stay. You live in one of the richest neighborhoods of New Jersey. Um, what changes in this journey? Is there something intrinsic that changes when something like that happens?
I assume so. I think that my family has kept me more grounded than maybe I'd otherwise be. So that's part of it. I don't, the other thing is that writers don't have a different sort of celebrity, which is I think has been good. I have a lot of friends that are famous, recognizably famous. And when you're a TV star or an actor or something like that, it's a very different thing than being a writer. No one really cares. So
No, it's
that's
today,
all.
of course, it's a writer has the kind of a celebrity which is closer to that of a star today. Today, people recognize writers. We see you guys.
I rarely, if I get recognized, it's always a surprise to me when I do. Um, but look, of course, it would be false to say nothing has changed. I can say that the thing about being successful that's been nice is just not is the lack of stress, the lack of worry over. My memories of my father sitting at the kitchen table trying to figure out how to pay the bills, which I know most of the people here listening to us do. That's not really a concern. It's not that I want to buy a yacht or anything like that. I don't really have an interest in anything like that. But it's the fact that I don't have to worry about those sort of things. I think that's the greatest joy of financial success.
Yes. And I think having those kind of that kind of an origin is what keeps you grounded too, because I'm sure you hark back to that, think about it, like you just said, and that definitely keeps one grounded. And it's these are beautiful stories, and maybe someday you'll write about it, your own story, your autobiography.
Well, I have. If you go to my, I think my website still has it, or my Twitter. Every Father's Day, I wrote a story about my father's death from the New York Times, and you can find it on my Twitter account under Father's Day. And every Mother's Day, there's one that I wrote about my mother. So you get a real sense of the family that I grew up with from those. I think from those two essays that I've read. So I have written it in the past. And if you read the Myron Bolitar novels, Myron has that kind of relationship with his parents. It's one of the interesting dynamics that I created with Myron and me that gave us attention. So Myron Bolitar's parents are still alive and he lives with them. So I'm sort of envious of that. And those scenes, I imagine, are had my parents survived and grown old, that would be my relationship with them, the relationship Myron has with his parents. Myron's dream in life is to get married and have children and move to the suburbs and have a house and the barbecue and the backyard basketball and all of that. And I have that, but Myron never gets that. So Myron and I have this interesting tension
Okay. Yeah.
as I created him. I don't really know if I intentionally did that, but it certainly has worked out. So that we're quite a lot alike, but we do have these differences in how our lives have played out.
My
So you could really learn a lot about I think from Myron, you could also see a lot of glimpses of my parents there and my family life there.
that is the series I have yet to pick up. I have not read those, but I will. I'll pick it up soon, and I'm
Oh,
going to.
you like them? They're really the Myrons are the plotting is the same, very similar to what I do in the standalones. So what I try to do is I always love those kind of great old detective series, but I never thought they were well plotted. I love the detectives in them, but the plot suffered. And since plotting is my thing, my idea was to try to combine those two, have that fun detective, Myron and Wynne, but now add a real story, a real mystery, a real crime.
Mhm.
That's what I hope the Myron Bolitar novels
I
have
look
done.
forward to reading those definitely. You told a story, Harlan, a very interesting story about your first ever book signing and how you sat there with your book and nobody came. And then people came and they asked you the way to the men's room and for other books and all. Please tell us that again. And then to today, when you've had a book signing which has lasted 7 hours, just went on and on and on in France, I believe. So
So yeah, I mean, first of all,
amazing. Yeah.
Today because of the way the world is, we expect overnight success. My first New York Times bestseller was my 10th published book, 10th. So it was a different era. You could get away with that a little bit more. But in the same way, if you open a restaurant, you don't expect to make a profit the first few years, or a business. But for some reason in writing now, we think that it should be you should instantly sell, millions of copies. It's a strange dynamic. But yes, I tell the story. I was sitting in a bookstore and it was in a mall, and no one came up to me. And the store, I think, only ordered 4 copies. And one man came up to me, and I'm all excited, and he says, "Where's the new John Grisham novel?" Like, I think it's over there. Where's the bathroom? Over there. And just as I was about to leave, an old man kind of shuffled up to me, and he said, "Is that your book?" And I'm like, kind of depressed. It's been a sort of a long day, and I said, "Yeah." And he just goes, "Wow, you're lucky." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "You have a book published. That's my dream. How lucky are you?" And I thought, he's right. He's right. How lucky am I? So, we all have to take those sort of things in stride.
And then you walked away but didn't buy your book.
No, I didn't buy the book. So I still sold no books that day.
And then today you sit for 7 hours just signing books when people come in to buy.
Yeah, before COVID, I haven't done a book signing since COVID. I used to try also to stand up the entire time, because I know people love to take pictures now.
Yes.
So to make it go faster, I would stand. We had a whole thing. We'd have one person who would handle the photos, and one person would open the book. So I'd sign it, have my arm around the person for the picture, and moving on. And both in Brazil and in France, I think the longest I've done both were, I don't know, 12, 1,300 people in 7 or 8 hours, something like that. But it's an honor. I mean, it's a privilege. So as I say to people who say, "Oh my God, that must be exhausting," I'm like, yeah, it's exhausting, but it's a lot better than sitting there with no one coming up to you. Trust me, there's writers at those festivals no one's coming up to. They'd be very happy to change places. So you have to have a great appreciation. I do have a great appreciation for those people who take the time and want their book signed and wait online. It's a tremendous honor. The same thing with social media. I try to read every comment. I don't comment on every comment, but if you're on my Instagram or my Twitter or my Facebook, well, maybe not the Facebook, that gets a little hairy, but I try to read every comment that I can, unless I'm in a bad mood and and people are complaining about something. Other than that, I try to read them.
So thank you so much, Harlan.
Thank you very much. It was great talking to you. Thanks.